Hello and welcome back to Resilience Unravelled. Today we're going to be talking about a really important subject. It's a subject which affects us all. I don't think anybody can escape this subject, and and I think it's really important that we have an expert in our midst, which indeed we do. In fact, we're joined by Sylvia Moore Myers, who is coming to talk to us about the whole subject of grief and trauma and such like. And well, first of all, let's welcome you. So, good afternoon, Sylvia. How are you?
Welcome and thank you for having me, Russell. I appreciate it.
And I'm guessing by the accent, you're across the pond. Where are you today?
I'm across the pond. Yeah, I was born and raised in northern Kentucky, Cincinnati, but I've been in Georgia now for 38 years, I think, something like that. So
Oh, well, look, tell us a little bit about yourself, Sylvia.
sure. Well, I'll start from now and go backwards a little bit. How's that?
Okay.
From the beginning to the end. Right now, I'm in my graduate studies for a doctorate of education in community care and a focus on traumatology, which is my specialty, I guess you'd say. I also hold a master's in human services, crisis, trauma, and response. So that came about because of my history of what happened to me. But I have three children, one in heaven, one in college, and one who is studying to be a pastor with Moody Bible. And it kind of started when my oldest son was on his way home. It was around Christmas. He was coming home, stopped at the gas station with a friend, was accosted in the parking lot and shot and killed.
Oh, sorry to hear.
Me too. That evening at the hospital, he became an organ donor because of it was a head injury. It was multiple tests to see if there was brain activity before that decision was made. But I knew when I walked into the emergency room and saw him, I knew that he was gone. That I was going to be picking out a coffin for a child that was still warm when I walked out of there. And that was the hardest part
Yeah.
that day, was just walking away. And so we had grief, we had trauma, we had PTSD. My marriage almost immediately started falling apart. That happens. Everyone wanted to talk about the marriage. No one wanted to talk about the grief. My 16-year-old at the time was floundering. My 7-year-old was lost in all of it, had no idea what was going on. And so it just seemed to get worse and worse. And you think it can't get worse, right? 8 months after my son was murdered, I'm on my way home. I'd met some friends. The guys were at home with a sitter. And I pulled into the garage right in with my little Volkswagen Bug. And a man stepped into my garage and attacked me. I did fight, and I'm little, but I'm wiry. But I fought and I got away. And I got his license plate number, and he went to jail. That evening, he told the police that he was trying to murder someone. That was his whole goal. He was trying to be a
Oh,
serial killer. I was his fourth victim, not his first.
wow.
Yep. So if you think of complex trauma and you're like, well, what does that mean? Look me up. 'Cause,
Yeah.
that's complex trauma, and that is distress, and that is everything that just destroys people and families and lives. And I went years trying to find some type of grief recovery, some type of magic pill, some type of magic anything. And really nothing was working. And I stumbled onto a grief recovery course, a book, and I went through that class. Instead of just talking about it, reading about it, I actually purposely decided to change.
Mm.
And by the way, that is key to everything. That decision to do is what really does. It just is. So I got through that and I was so excited because I didn't go back in grief recovery my child or myself. I went all the way back to early childhood, and I found the neglect and the abuse from early childhood. And I brought all of that trauma forward, and I grief recovered my entire life. And that was a moment for me because we tend to pile on the grief and we ignore it like it's going to go away, right? I'm good. I'm good. I'm good my whole life. So, but I got through all of those. I finished my bachelor's degree, and I wrote the book Gold Scars, The Truth About Grief, Loss, and Trauma, and How to Beautifully Mend. Because what I learned is we really don't heal. We're human beings. We scar. I mean,
Mm.
look on your body right now. You can point to a scar and you probably remember how you got it.
Mm.
I think that the reason we're supposed to scar, because we're not a chameleon, we're not growing back a tail or an organ like a sea cucumber, right? We're humans. We scar on purpose. And I think the reason that we do is because people with wounds are looking for people with scars. We are that person that they go to, Russell, and they say, how did you get through this? What did you do? And I go, what you have in you right now is all you need to get through this, because the word scar also is strength, courage, adaptability, and resilience. And all four of those are pre-wired in your brain, and they're there for the tapping into. It's like Dorothy clicking the red shoes. It's like, click them right now. Don't wait till you get all the way to the end. Now's the time. But that's really resilience. Coping is what I did when my son died. I coped with what happened. Resilience is different because it helps you prepare for the next event and the next event. And that's in your brain right now. And a lot of people don't realize that they can tap into that process. And again, it's a mindset. It's rethinking. I was running around looking for a way to erase everything that happened in my life so I would feel better. I should have been looking for a highlighter, and that's where I got the gold scars, the kintsugi vase. I got a little one I brought for you to look at, a kintsugi vase that's broken. The Japanese culture, you don't throw away the vase. You mend it with gold. It's more resilient. It's more beautiful. You cherish it even more than you did before it was broken. And that was the idea of gold scars. We fill those with gold. We highlight that. We deal with it. We pull grief out. We slap that witch around and tell it how it really makes us feel. And then we begin that healing process. And so if you're going to mend, beautifully mend, right?
Okay, you've given us a lot to go at there. So let's unpick a few of those things. So the first thing you said that I mean, with people, you say that scars don't heal. I mean, there's the idea that this idea of grief, isn't it? That the grief doesn't go away. You just learn to surround
No.
it and move on in a way, isn't it?
Exactly. It's called reframing in psychology. You reframe what happened to you. I didn't need a way to forget what happened to my son and to me. I needed a better way to remember. I needed to know that I could think of him at any time and I could laugh about the funny things and cry about the sad things and watch the video of him skateboarding without falling completely apart, right?
Mm.
I had to reframe it. And that's part of the healing process with grief. And PTSD also is reframing the memories so that they do not bring tragedy every time you remember.
Yes. And there's also a theory, isn't it, that you can recue the memories. So actually, you don't actually have to talk. You don't need to access them every single time because the trouble is you can re-edit the memory if you're not careful, can't you?
You can remember something that wasn't true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that's a lot of folks get stuck in their grief in a holding pattern, like an airplane going around without a landing strip, because they don't know how to reframe. They just keep reliving it, and they feel like they're obligated to do
Yeah.
that. Somehow it's written down that if you go through this, you must go through it your whole life, and that's such a lie.
Yeah. And the challenge here is that there's something, well, how can I put this? There's something, I was going to say natural, but I don't know if I would need to, but there's something regular about the fact that your parent dies, a parent dies, because actually that's sort of the order of things. But it's very different when a child dies, isn't it? Because in a sense, that's not meant to happen. And especially in the way that happened to you, because that person was sort of taken away from you
Right.
rather than having any sort of natural problem. So it is interesting that you sort of immediately referred to the fact that your marriage encountered issues, and that happens a lot with trauma, particularly around the death of a child. I was just wondering what's your sort of rationale for understanding that and why that might be the case.
Well, I know exactly why. Because when you go through great trauma, especially if you have PTSD or just profound grief, your body rewires itself a little bit. It's a resilient action in your brain and it's protecting you. And so you might have been the one that cooked all the meals and did all the laundry. And now your goals or your roles switch. Someone
Yeah,
now is doing that and the other person's doing this. You don't feel the same way about that person all of a sudden. It's different feeling. It's not that you can't get back to where you were, but at that very moment, your brain is broken. We call it heartache. It's really the brain.
yeah,
Your brain is broken. It needs to heal. It needs to mend. And that's what drives people away. And when I said earlier to you, our marriage almost immediately fell apart. Everyone that wanted to talk to us wanted to talk about our marriage. Well, our marriage wasn't broken. Someone murdered our child.
mm.
And we didn't know how to act around each other anymore. You know,
I'm very glad you've made that point because there's this whole mythology around heart and heartbreak and such like. And you're absolutely right. It's nothing to do with the heart at all. And you're so right about the brain side of things. So are you saying that in a sense that the respective brains of parents change differently, so it takes them in a different direction, or what? Can you unpack that a bit more for me?
You mean anybody that goes through a great loss? I mean, your only person in the world might be your dog. You could be by yourself right now, and your dog is the only human in your life. And you lose that pet, you're going to go through great grief. If the dog dies tragically, you could have PTSD. It is the connection of that loss that deepens the loss and your ability to cope with it, and then bounce back from it, resilience. But it breaks the brain. I mean, you're going to go through great grief and trauma and loss, and you're thinking differently. And it doesn't mean that you're crazy or you lost your mind. It's really your brain's way of just holding it together. You're kind of numb, I guess, is another technical word. And that's actually a word in psychology, being numb, being that person that just don't feel anything. Well, you do feel it. You're just holding it all, right? You're just holding it in and you're holding it together. And maybe there's a little blame with some families. Parents will separate because they look at the parent, they see the child, they go through the woulda, coulda, shouldas. Those are my favorite ones, where I wish I would have called him earlier and had him come home instead of, take his friend buddy home. Maybe if, we hadn't have done this or that, he wouldn't have even been playing guitar. He was a 19-year-old college student playing guitar at his buddy's house, and all the college friends were there. What do you expect him to be doing on a Friday night, right?
He's living his best
Living
life.
his life, yeah. Going, picked up a candy bar and a Mountain Dew. He was going to drop him off to his girlfriend on the way to our house. We were going to put the tree up the next day. Life was going on just as normal as rain in the spring, and he was snatched just like that. If that doesn't break a parent's brain, I don't know what does.
Yeah, it makes sense. And the thing which is important here is that it's not just the grief for what you've lost, it's the grief for all the futures you've lost as well, isn't it? It's that this could have been and all that and all this and parents and grandchildren and it's that life sort of taken away. That's part of the problem, isn't it? Because that never goes away, I guess.
What would he have done? What would he have been? How many grandchildren from him would I have right now? His brothers, when Isaac turned 19, he went through the grief all over again because he's now older than his brother.
Yeah.
Daniel, when he became 20 years old, he re-struggled with the entire loss of his brother that many years after, because he was older than his oldest brother now. And so Jacob is frozen in time for us as a 19-year-old that never got a chance of doing anything else. He didn't get to marry his girlfriend. They didn't have children. We'll never know. And yeah, those are real issues when someone loses someone. And it could be you feel that way that you lost your mom. It's like, I lost my mom. She was my only friend. I'm never going to be able to spend that time with her. She was taken away too early. Any loss, you're going to deal with those issues. And it is a brain issue, and you can get better.
And what's significant here is that what you're saying there is really important, isn't it? There are constant reminders, there are anniversaries, there are events, there are smells, there are occasions. There's a piece of music that you hear, that evocative creation of the past. And it's like, well, you're talking about PTSD, that flashback sort of process is really important, isn't it? And so what you're saying here is that it's not about forgetting. I forget the exact phrase you used. It's not about regretting. It's about highlighting. Was that the phrase? I remember using the term highlight a pen, but what was the phrase you said?
I said I didn't need a way to forget what
Yes.
happened to Jacob or I needed a better way to remember.
That's it.
I didn't need to try to find a way to erase everything. You can't make it go away. I mean, no one's going to give you a lobotomy. I needed a better way to remember, and I needed to highlight her. I needed to say, this is what happened. This is how it made me feel. And that is beginning steps of healing. I mean, just turning your mindset to say, I'm not going to let this bother me anymore. I'm done. I'm done. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to help my kids. I'm going to help myself. I've remarried. I've finished my master's now. I'm working on my PhD. Life goes on if you let it. And I think a lot of us feel like we have to sit in that stuff and just waller in it. And it's get up right now.
I'm intrigued by what you're saying here because You're describing a different process to the traditional Elizabeth Kubler-Ross process, and I just wonder whether, and there's a theory that that's held to be something that's true for a long time, and I think there's an increasing movement of people saying that's not a real process. It's not actually a process at all. I just wondered what your views were on that.
Yeah, I highly respect Kupler. Anybody in study of psychology or human services knows who she is and why she wrote that. And there was a specific audience that she was targeting. That were people that were terminally ill.
Yeah.
You can't apply terminally ill opinions on grief and death and dying and put it to the masses, but that's exactly what people did. So it doesn't work that way. And grief is not in a straight line. It's not
No.
linear. It's all over the place. So you feel all of those emotions in grief, and that's normal. Every
Yeah.
last one of them, and the woulda, coulda, shouldas, what ifs, and maybe if, but you don't do it in the order that it was laid out in her book. She did not mean for it to be that way either. Those are
Mm.
just simply ways you go through grief. And then 10 years later, you're looking at you're going through your closet and you find a Mother's Day card from your child on Mother's Day. How
Mm.
convenient. And you sit on the floor and you cry 10 years later.
Yeah.
Why? Because it was a moment that you're back in time and you're very sad. And those are normal. And it's okay. It's okay to have those times. I have an entire video of every picture we can find of Jacob, and it's a video put to all the music that my children and I love, and his father that love, that remind us of Jacob. And every year on his birthday and Mother's Day and sometime before, around the time that he passed, I'll watch the video and
Mm.
I'll cry, and then I'm good. It's completely normal to remember and cry. It's also fun to remember and laugh your butt off about the funny things that your
Yeah.
child or your friend did. And we do that a lot more than we do the crying.
But that's interesting you say that, and I often talk. I was actually talking to someone who had a miscarriage recently, and they talked
Mm.
about something similar that it's sometimes useful to create. I mean, she was talking about a shrine in particular, but actually that sort of living or static memento is really important. Whatever, your video is a great idea, but that's really important, isn't it? Because there's a sort of sense that you don't want to lose the spirit or the essence of what that person was and what it meant to you. And the worry is, isn't it, that if you just try and remember that's a very faulty way of doing it. And I think sometimes that's why we don't move on, isn't it? Because we don't have that pure thing of being able to go and say, "Oh yeah, that." And I love what you said about the laughter, because the life you had together was full of laughter. The grief came afterwards, didn't it?
It Yeah, it's a lot of people, a lot of parents will do one of two things. They'll make a shrine to their child and never touch the room for 30 years, or they'll try to erase everything. They're one or
Yeah.
the other. And actually, a little bit of shrining is okay. Too much is not healthy, right?
No.
Change the room out, make it into a gym. It's okay. Your child's not going to haunt you for changing his room around. That's being normal. But having the little shrines and videos, we have pictures of Jacob, throughout the house. We didn't try it for the longest time, though. I'd say a year after Jacob died, I couldn't look at a picture of him without just,
Yeah.
bawling my eyes out. So, and now when I see a new picture on we have a memorial on Facebook. Someone will drum up a new photo of Jacob, and on the Facebook page it goes. It's like, woo, we celebrate, new photo day, So that's our milestone, and it's a little sad, a little bittersweet, but really a happy moment because
Mm.
he made a lot of people happy when he was alive, and we like celebrating that his
Yeah.
life was a happy one.
And that's the point, isn't it? Like we said earlier, you grow around the grief, but the grief is still there, and
Oh,
you don't want it to be vanished. You don't want to cut it out. It's as people come to me sometimes and say, "Can you remove this from my mind? Can you use some sort of regression technique to say, let's just pluck out this memory, whatever it is, whatever trauma it is." But that's the point, isn't it? That it's part of what makes you you to have that grief or that experience in your background. So I can see why you've written a book called Scars, and I can see why you've written it now called Golden Stars, because it's around the Japanese vase idea, which is all good.
yes.
So who did you write the book for, though?
So I became a grief recovery specialist after I recovered because I was
Mm.
so excited. I'm like, oh, I can help people. And then I became an advanced grief recovery specialist. And then I started classes. And I just felt like I wasn't reaching more than a few people at a time. And
Yeah.
I didn't have a busy podcast. I have a busy life. I wrote the book so I could reach as many people as possible to let them know that actually what you have in you right now can set in motion your healing process. making sure and being healthy. I wanted them to know that it's taking care of yourself too. It's the 7 H's are just that, helping and happy and hilarious and, and all of those things in there, easy to remember so people would know that it's caring for yourself from the inside out and the outside in is part of the healing as well as a mindset, but that we all have it in us, the ability to heal from any circumstances. And when you read the book, I'm sorry, it's like a murder mystery, but it's true. You'll see that I went through a lot of grief as a child, as a teenager, a young adult. And then the icing on the cake, of course, was me being attacked in my own driveway after my son had just been murdered by a copycat murderer of all people. And you think it can't get worse, but the good news is no matter how worse it gets, how bad it gets, you always have the ability to heal. And it's not forgetting, it's remembering differently, reframing.
Yeah.
And a lot of us, the reason we don't heal is we don't go through that emotional narrative that's very important. You'll see it in therapy. It'll be emotion focused individual therapy or, emotion therapy or whatever, or narrative therapy. Those are important because you get to talk about what it is that hurt you. And by talking and putting it into real words, you're able to reframe it.
So you've mentioned reframing 2 or 3 times, and for people that don't know, because there's a lot of people that don't, can you give us an example of how? Because it's a thought process, isn't it? So can you give us Can you give us an example of how that might work?
I can tell you what it might look like on the other side of it also. On the other side of unreframed grief, just keep living it, is the only thing you can think of is what your child looked like on the gurney after he was shot. Just all you think about. You think of his murder and his death, and it's negative, and you cry, and poor pitiful you, and you don't know what you're going to do with your life, and you're going to quit and everything is a negative, and you're so unhappy, and you have a right to be unhappy. And you really haven't dealt with the grief that you have. You don't even probably know you have PTSD at this point. You're just shell shocked by everything that happens to you. Every event, you won't even let your 8-year-old go outside and play because you're afraid he'll get hit by a car. Everything is focused around that one event, and you really haven't started reliving your life. So by literally dealing with the death, by talking about what happened, by talking about the emotions involved with it and reframing it, and then talking about the good things, and what you're going to do in the future, and what's, how we're going to help the 8-year-old. Just making it into a narrative about yourself in the future and how you're going to, be different today and tomorrow and the next day starts that healing process.
So it's almost about changing focus rather than, because some people would say a reframing thing is rather than saying the body on the gurney as a negative thing, it's somehow reframe that as a positive thing. So that's where what we're doing is you're changing the narrative process of saying, instead of thinking about that thing, think of all the other things. So it's not a distraction technique, but it's a refocusing technique, really, is it?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Because I'm never going to be able to forget what it was like to be in the hospital.
Yeah. Nor should you.
Yeah, and nor should I. And I walked right in, and I knew that he was gone. And I knew it because I had run Life Squad years before. I know that was a head wound, and there was no way he was leaving that hospital. I just knew it. Nobody else in the hospital did except for me, the nurses, and the doctors. Everyone else saw him after he was all wrapped up and he was in ICU waiting to be an organ donor. And so the balloons came and the teenagers, and there was 2,000 people around the hospital and in and out, all day long, saying goodbye and just praying, that he was going to be well. And that whole time I just knew that was it. And I didn't know how I was going to deal with those children out there crying. So I almost stopped thinking about it, and I started worrying about everyone else. And I did that for about 3 or 4 months, that I wasn't even dealing with the death of my own son. I was like a robot picking out everything, and burying my child. And
And that's sometimes you have to hold yourself together, don't you? Because actually the hardest time is after a funeral, because that's when everybody disappears in a way, because they've all gone to live their life and you're often left alone, aren't you? I just wonder how much the organ donor process helped, if it did help, because it's that perception of your son living on in a strange sort of way.
It is. And I highly recommend, when my child was 16 years old, he walked in and asked his dad, what does this mean if I sign this? It was his organ donor. He said, well, God forbid anything happens to you, Jacob. You're offering your organs to somebody else that can live,
Yeah.
if they can take them, that you give them. He said, okay. And he signed it. Out the room he goes. 3 years later, he's called up on his signature, and we're in the hospital. He's an adult. He made that decision as a child, so they want our okay on it. And I was immediately, yes, of course. When you say of course, you don't realize that you're walking
Mm.
away from a warm person, and you're next time you see them, they're cold in a coffin you chose, right?
Mm.
That's the hard part. And a lot of people want to hold that child to the very last second, to the last heartbeat. And that's your decision too. And that's a good one if that's the one you make. If you make the owner donation one, I had 5 other known lives that were saved that night, the
Yeah.
next morning. And these were people with children and grandchildren. And it was amazing that they all had a chance to live. And all of them have now passed except for one. So each time someone passes, we lose a little bit of Jacob again, but look at somebody that he touched. Look at the people that he touched after that. So in the long run, yeah, I'd say even in the short run, it was really a great decision to
Yeah.
save lives with a life that we couldn't save.
That's really interesting because we had a guest on here once I think he'd had 4 or 5 heart transplants because he'd had some sort of terrible life illness. But I remember him talking about the fact that part of that person lived on in them, and there was a symbolism, and they often met up with the other families. And it was complicated because the heart transplants didn't always take because they're very difficult. But
Mm.
it always has struck me that organ donation is a really important thing. But the problem is, of course, that sometimes you have to be realistic about the fact that once you've contributed an organ, it's not going to be great to look at your son again because often
Right.
it's that the lid has to stay shut, doesn't it? Because you have to say your farewells before that. But
Yeah.
um, but I think it's an amazing thing because it sort of brings there's such a senseless, meaningless death in a way, isn't it? Well, no, let me rephrase that. It's such a senseless death, and it
Yeah.
brings some sort of sense to bringing so much life and joy to other people. So, and it sounds like he's the sort of boy who would have been up for that.
We would have, yeah. And Jacob was a pretty cool kid. A lot of people liked him, and he worked part time in our office. And I was shocked when at the funeral there were adult people, business people that came to his funeral that I vaguely knew. And they'd said things like, yeah, we called the office one day and Jacob took care of us and we're here because of Jacob. I'm like, wow. So your people touch a lot of people that you don't know.
Yeah.
And for us, it was standing room only at his funeral. And it was because of the people that knew him. It wasn't necessarily who knew us.
So if people want to find out more, get a hold of the book, find out more about you and what you do, how can they do that, Sylvia?
I'm easy to find. If you can spell my name, sylviamoremyers.com, or goldscars.com is even better. I got a link tree that I'll let you throw in there. And if you go to my website, to Gold Scars, and you want to buy the book, buy it from the publisher. There's a little button there. It says buy from publisher, and
Oh yeah.
put in MJA40, MJA40, and it'll give you 40% off the book. That's the publisher's gift to your audience if they buy it directly from them from this show. And but yeah, everything's there. I'm working on my second and third book at the same time. So,
Wow.
but those will be on there as well. There's free PDFs. If you don't want to buy the book yet, you want to check me out, I give you half of the book free on the PDF. Just click it and get it for free in your email. And there's also a newsletter that you'll get every Tuesday until you don't want it anymore, and you can cancel anytime. But that I'm really, like I said, I'm easy to find on Gold Scars. I'm published by a New York publishing house, and it's international. Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, Amazon, but buying from the publisher is cheaper.
All the
So,
usual places. Great. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you today, Sylvia. Thanks very much for spending time with us. I really do appreciate it.
it's been my pleasure.
You take care.